I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Things are heating up. The pressure is building. This financial market's about to blow. Stacy Herbert.
Max Keiser.
Yes.
Before we get into Jamie Dimon's tirade, we have to look at this poster from Singapore. This is a JP Morgan advertisement in Singapore. We believe human behavior creates unique investment opportunities. Many investors make emotionally influenced decisions that can cause market irregularities.
Well, that's what we've been talking about. That when banks like JP Morgan create chaos in markets using derivatives, people get frightened and they make irrational decisions and prices jump around. And who's there profiting from this? JP Morgan. This is a form of price propaganda. This is a form of financial terrorism. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, by propagating this form of financial terrorism, is by definition a financial terrorist.
Okay, so he agrees that human behavior can create unique investment opportunities, that this chaos can create opportunities. So when you read a headline like Jamie Dimon's tirade against bank regulators, he threw a hissy fit about a capital surcharge for the systemically important banks. Dimon's tirade was directed at Mark Carney, Bank of Canada governor, in a closed-door meeting in front of more than dozens of leading bankers and regulators, the Financial Times reports. According to the FT, things got so heated that Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein sent an apologetic email to Carney afterwards.
Good cop, bad cop. There's Blankfein doing the bad cop routine, screaming at a financial officer of another country, gets him completely frazzled, and in comes Smooth Lloyd, Bald Lloyd, smooth coming in, talking him down, good cop, bad cop. And this is what we saw Tim Geithner in Europe trying to get Merkel to accept European TARP. Who are these American financial terrorists, and why are they being allowed to roam the world and cause their destruction? Why can't someone put them in jail? Arrest them! Jamie Dimon in cuffs!
Again, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of a bank, is in a closed-door meeting that we don't know about other than the fact that he threw a tirade to our regulators and to a central banker. Now, think about the Occupy Wall Street guys being arrested, dozens and dozens of them, and maced in the face for walking down a sidewalk. Here's Jamie Dimon. Was he maced in the face? No, according to the reports, no, he wasn't. These bankers, the Lloyd Blankfeins and Jamie Dimons of the world, are able to meet in closed-door meetings with regulators and screech at them. Now let's turn to this now infamous clip from the BBC where Alessio Rastani spoke to them. He spoke some truth. Everybody in the mainstream media is now dismissing him because, shock, he loses his own money when he trades. But Max, let's look at his answer when he was asked whether this European stabilization plan would work.
What I would say to everybody is, get prepared. This is not a time right now to wishful thinking the government is going to sort things out. The governments don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world. Goldman Sachs does not care about this rescue package, neither does the big funds.
As we've been saying, Goldman Sachs rules the world. The bankers rule over the governments. We've been saying this for years now. This should not be a surprise. Now, the trader here is just saying, look, it's an adversarial relationship. I'm trading against you. You're my enemy. You, the person out there who has to work for a living. I get bailouts. I don't work for a living. I just take all the money the government gives me. I make bets. If I make a losing bet, they bail me out. You suffer. Ha ha, you're the loser.
Well, he's saying, in fact, that all of you people out there waiting for your government to rescue you, they are not going to rescue you because they are working for the banks. The banks rule the world. You have to appeal to the bankers to step down, come out with your hands up, whatever it is. You have to talk to them because talking to your government is not going to do anything for you at this point because, as he says, the banks rule the world. And how many times has this Dick Durbin, the senator from America, also said this? He said the banks rule the place. So how many times do you have to be told?
Right. I mean, I don't understand. Here you have the Occupy Wall Street folks. They're down there, and they're wondering, well, we're here. Well, now what do we do? Well, they have to demand that the bankers come out with their hands up, or they're going to go in.
So here he is. He says that Goldman Sachs rules the world and the other big banks. Now let's turn back a little bit, wind back a bit in his interview where he explains the mind of a trader, how a banker looks at the financial chaos in the world.
For most traders, it's not about, it's that we don't really care that much how they're going to fix the economy, how they're going to fix the whole situation. Our job is to make money from it. And personally, I've been dreaming of this moment for 3 years. I have a confession, which is I go to bed every night, I dream of another recession. I dream of another moment like this. Why? Because people don't seem to maybe remember, but the 30s depression, the depression in the 30s, wasn't just about a market crash. There were some people who were prepared to make money from that crash. And I think anybody can do that. It isn't just for some people in the elite. Anybody can actually make money. It's an opportunity.
Well, once again, it shows the asymmetric quality of this guerrilla warfare between traders that can profit in any market and the overall economy that can only profit in up markets. And not only that, but a down market, because it's driven by fear, happens quickly, so your annualized rates of returns are higher, so they have an incentive to create fear. Fear pays more than faith. Traders know this, and they love to stoke fear. And they are working against the general population, who can only have benefits if markets go up. So it's a completely asymmetric warfare, just like we see asymmetric warfare all over the world, where the U.S. will go into Iraq, for example, and call that a war. As somebody once said, it's a war if somebody's shooting back. You know, here you have a financial war, but it would only be a war if the people getting abused by financial terrorists were shooting back in some way, but they're not.
Okay, let's wind back a bit here, because he says traders do not care about the economy. They're only looking to profit. Now, who gets appointed to run the economy in the United States, in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Italy, at the IMF? Who are hired? Who are the head guys of the Treasury Secretary, the economic policy? Who gets to determine that? Former bankers at
Goldman Sachs.
And
JP Morgan.
So this guy has just said these guys don't care about the economy.
No.
So why are you putting them in charge of economic policy?
Put Ben Bernanke in that camp. Ben Bernanke, the only thing he cares about is reinflating the housing bubble, which only benefits the bankers who are short those bonds that they got destroyed in the housing bubble collapse. He's not caring about workers, wages, economic growth, the viability of the U.S. economy, the U.S. standing abroad. I mean, think of what Bernanke's done to America's standing abroad. He has trashed it. He's made America the laughingstock of the world.
But remember, this now famous tweeter, Alessio Rastani, said that bankers don't care about the economy. Investors tell MPs bank reforms must be watered down. Top institutional investors have warned MPs the reforms proposed by the Vickers report must be significantly watered down to avoid damaging British banks.
That's wrong. That's false.
But as Alessio said, bankers love crashes. They profit on the way down. So let these banks crash. But now they're going crying to our MPs saying, oh, you can't let us crash. So either they like crashes or they don't like crashes. What do they like?
Classic intellectual profile of a psychopath. They are two-faced. They serve two masters simultaneously. And they go to the regulators saying we don't want to crash, and they hope to get mollycoddled by regulators like, we'll have to fire a few bankers, and then who will buy our yachts? In the back room, they're committing acts of financial terrorism, trashing themselves as a suicide banker, worse than any jihadi.
The warning, which in effect was a demand for a radical U-turn from the government, was made at a secret meeting between leading investors and members of the Treasury Select Committee last week in the UK. Again, secret meetings. These bankers get to have face-to-face meetings with our representatives and threaten them. They threaten them with tirades. They shout in their face, and they are never maced.
No, where is Nick Clegg in all this? Shouldn't he be carrying some pepper spray next time he meets one of these bankers from the city?
What about Vince Cable? Vince Cable said it's a financial war. So what is he going into these meetings without any pepper spray to spray in their frigging face?
How come Vince Cable's not pepper spraying these bankers?
Why is Vince Cable not bringing pepper spray into these meetings?
Why is Vince Cable not bringing pepper spray into these meetings? What else?
Well, one senior investor said, quote, "The banks are trading at half their book value, and if we're ever going to get our money back, the return on equity has got to be higher. This is not going to happen under the provisions laid out, i.e. higher capital reserve requirements."
There's no book value.
This investor thinks, well, there's some great deal there. Why doesn't he just buy the whole bank and then break it up and make it like twice as money?
Because they've got 30 times their capitalization in liabilities on their balance sheet, and the breakup value is a negative 5,000%. This is what the problem is around the world. This is why the IMF has to bail out the banks, but the IMF is broke because they're made up of banks, and they need a bailout from another series of banks who, by the way, need a bailout from another series of banks. And you go round and round in this Mobius strip, a carousel of debt, musical chairs, and then once in a while, oh, well, Lehman's gone, then a Bear Stearns is gone. Now they're going to go after a big guy. You know, God, please make JP Morgan go away in this next musical chairs roundup. We want to get rid of these terrorists, please, please.
Okay, Max, remember at the top of the show we showed you a poster from JP Morgan to tell you that they signal to each other what the game is. Here's a signal, a headline from January of 2011, earlier this year, what we covered. It's from Davos. World needs $100 trillion more credit, says World Economic Forum. This is where all these guys, the Lloyd Blankfeins and Jamie Dimons of the world meet, and they said we need $100 trillion more dollars.
Chutzpah.
Let's see about what they're doing to put that plan into action. Multi-trillion grand plan to save the Eurozone is being prepared. So European officials are, of course, planning a 2 trillion or 3 trillion or 4 trillion euro bailout. We don't know, it changes all the time, but they need to rescue the Euro system by November 4th, before Cannes.
Before Cannes. Because the price of hookers goes up on November 4th. It's the winter rates. But listen, $100 trillion is the real number. And because that's what it's going to take to recapitalize the world's bank. But of course, that means every single currency must be recalibrated, and just about every single country in the world loses its sovereignty, and you've got an oligarch of global bankers running the show, and that's the new world order.
Okay, well, let's move back to the story here, because let's see how this plan is going to work. They're saying, first, the Europe's banks would have to be recapitalized with many tens of billions of euros to reassure markets that a Greek or Portuguese default will not upset the system. And then if the banks are unable to raise that money, those tens of billions, on the private market, they said, well, they'll either go to the taxpayer or the European Financial Stability Facility, right? The second leg of the plan is to bolster the EFSF, because apparently that doesn't have the money to bail out the banks that they say this cunning plan relies on.
Right, so they've got both foot on both sides of a teeter-totter. They're balancing back and forth, juggling water balloons while being shot at by a BB gun held by a psychopath and claiming that's economic policy. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
That's going to do it for this half, but stay there. Much more coming your way. Don't go away. Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Los Angeles and talk with former Goldman Sachs and Bear Stearns banker Nomi Prinz. Nomi is author of several financial crash books, both nonfiction and now fiction, with her latest, the 1929 crash novel, Black Tuesday. Nomi Prinz, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, Nomi Prinz, your novel is about the Great Depression. Are we in another Great Depression? And if so, are the central banks, the G20, IMF, World Bank leaders making it worse?
I believe we are in a second Great Depression, so let me get that out first. I'd written about why we were in that and coming into that, and it takes a pillage. And doing the research for this novel and just watching everything that's happening around us every day, it becomes more and more clear that our global economy is in a depression, and the world leaders are doing absolutely nothing to try and understand exactly why, and instead it's sort of like there's a mold in the walls of the global economy, and they keep sort of repainting over the walls as opposed to getting in there and figuring out what caused the mold to begin with, and so it continues to rot from the inside out. And you have all these bailout measures and conversations about bailout measures in return for austerity, in return for waiting until the next bailout measure is discussed without actually looking at the internal causes of the rot within the banking system.
Yeah, let's examine that list here for a second. Central banks, the G20, IMF, World Bank, all of those entities are effectively on the same side of the table. They're all bankers helping bankers. There's nobody actually whose interests lie with those who are being victimized by these bankers. Is that true?
Well, that's true. Take a look at Greece, for example, which none of these people, these leaders, seems to have really done besides for the conversations about bailouts versus austerity measures and whether it's going to default or not default, and it can't default because we're going to bail out, and all these conversations that are going on. If you take a look at the actual reports of their conditions from even the last annual report for the National Bank of Greece, for example, there is a very clear discussion about how their mortgage loans, for example, have deteriorated. Their positions in what they purchased in terms of U.S. and dollar-denominated tax mortgages, and also the ones in the loans that are within their own country. So there's this problem with deteriorating investments and credit within their own balance sheet, within their own books, which you can see in every other bank, throughout Greece and Italy and Spain, in the U.S. And none of these leaders are addressing how to fix things from that bottom, from that kernel level up, where it would be a loan-to-loan fix with respect to an individual, where there would be a complete write-down and dissolution of a toxic asset with respect to an investor. If we had ever started to do that from the beginning of when this crisis in 2008 became known in the United States and perpetuated throughout the world, because it cannot be anything but a global crisis, because we have a global financial system where things get created in one country and perpetuated and sold everywhere else. It has to be a global crisis, and there was no looking at the bottom level, the mechanics of what was going on. Bailing out investors and banks from the top does not help fix what is the foundation of the problem at the bottom, and it can't and it won't.
All right, Naomi Prinz, we just played an interview with a banker in London that's making the rounds on YouTube right now. It's gone viral. The banker says, quote, governments don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world. Now, as a former managing director at Goldman Sachs yourself, your thoughts?
The banks do rule the world economy. In that respect, they rule the world because, again, even if we look to this crisis, if we look to the crisis in 1929, where there was a crash on Wall Street, it proliferated into a global Great Depression for a decade. What happens is that the banks and the bankers create securities or assets. In 29, it was trust, but they basically are these non-transparent ways of sucking in money from people, from investors, where they've created securities or trusts or whatever that are not able to sustain themselves. They bank the money up front. They short the securities if they can, and the world and individuals are left holding the bank. In that holding the bag. Sorry, that was a Freudian slip. And the bankers have at this point made their money, collected their fees, created these assets, created these securities, and are out. Where the rest of the world is left holding all of the deterioration that has a much longer life than the moment in time where a Goldman Sachs banker came up with a new security and sold it throughout, U.S. pension funds, municipalities, towns in Norway, towns in Iceland, banks in Greece, and they're out and they've made their bonuses and they're done. And that is how bankers continue to control the global economy, and global leaders, like we we're just discussing, are enabling and oblivious, or both, probably enabling, and it continues.
Okay, so now a moment ago, you said that nobody's taking care of the underlying root problem, the root cause of this global financial crisis. We can now say, without any misgivings, that the root cause, the root problem, is fraud. Now, that fraud is not being addressed by the regulatory commissions, the SEC, all the other various regulatory agencies. So if they're not going to take care of the fraud, and at what point in the socio-economic political chain of command is there a backstop against this? In other words, we know Bernanke is a fraud. We know Geithner's a fraud. It appears as though Barack Obama is a fraud. So is it really a point now of no return, where there's just simply no one who's going to step forward, as they did in the 30s? You might want to talk about this, I guess, as by comparison, the Pecora Commission, where people addressed the fraud. Naomi Prinz.
Well, yeah, in the 30s, and that was kind of the impetus for what I was doing with the novel, the Pecora Commission hoisted bankers up in front of Congress, which has happened in the last few years, but the difference is they actually dismantled the banking structure as it was back then, rather than continue to allow banks to have the benefit of people's deposits and to make loans and to use that as fodder to create securities and speculate and trade and make all sorts of fees and monies and profits along the way with that, what the Pecora Commission ultimately did is divide banks so that they could continue to provide commercial services, take deposits, give loans, create infrastructural programs, etc., for businesses and individuals. And on the other side, if they wanted to trade, they could choose to trade, they could choose to speculate, they could choose to create trusts, but they would not be backed by the government. That was why the FDIC was created, to preserve people's deposits, not to preserve and to bail out and to substantiate speculative trading. What we have had in the last few years is something completely the opposite. It's not even as bad as it was in 1929 as it was fixed by the Pecora Commission and the Glass-Steagall Act that came out of it in 1933 to separate the banks. Why it's worse is because all of these leaders that are refusing to acknowledge that fraud, that rot at the bottom of the system continues to exist and continues to be created and continues to deteriorate the global economy, rather than acknowledging that from the regulator, from the Fed level, from Obama's level, from Geithner, from the IMF, from the ECB, they are basically bailing it out. They are substantiating without dividing the banking system, the global banking system as it exists today, and therefore continuing to allow the fraud at the bottom to stay there, the securities that were created from that fraud to continue to be marked at or not marked at any kind of realistic level. So it continues to seep into our global financial and economic economy. And this is a problem. And this will continue right now. We had opportunities. There have been many investigation committees that have hoisted CEOs. Lloyd Blankfein was up there, Jamie Dimon, in front of Washington, and nothing has come of that. We had President Obama campaign on this idea that the Wall Street fat cats would not be allowed to continue what they're doing. Well, they continue to make profits and bonuses, and that's not even the worst problem. The worst problem is they continued in a banking system that has not been separated, that has not been examined, and that continues globally to fester as it is. So we are actually, I believe, in a more prolonged depression state because of the people that we have in leadership right now are so entwined with these bankers, are so entwined with the status quo of the banking parameters and the landscape and how banks can do everything in one entity and bailing them out when it fails, that we are just going to have real prolonged pain, with the exception of here and there a few settlements and a few civil suits and a couple of lawsuits that really, in comparison, will not extract a renewed, stable banking landscape.
Yeah, we've seen something similar going on in the UK. After the crisis, there was a commission. They looked at the crisis and they determined that some new regulations needed to be implemented in what's called a Vickers report. And the report was saying, well, you need to separate the speculative bank from the deposit bank. There needs to be ring-fenced. Basically the same thing that was done in the 30s. But now, after a few weeks' time, the lobbyists in the UK are saying, no, we can't accept that. It would destroy jobs, and you're going to kill the industry, the goose that's laying the golden eggs, and now they're going to water down those even feeble attempt at regulation. So I would take it that in the UK it's the same thing as we're seeing in the US. And this is really, I guess, also interesting, a global situation. Same thing for banks in Europe and in the US. There's this tendency to just let the speculative elements run riot. Is that true?
Yeah, not only there's a tendency, there's a willingness, there's an enabling to let this system run riot. It's fueling this system by the bailout discussions that happened in the United States. Tim Geithner was in Europe recently saying that Europe should continue to do the same thing, because only by sort of printing money, by bailing out the system as it is, by making whole the investors, by making whole the banks, without any regard to what's actually going on at the book level of these banks, at the loan level, at the toxic asset level, at the evaluation level. Forget all that. They have no interest in knowing about the true state of any of these institutions. They will just continue to find the funds to bail them out at the expense of the greater global population and the greater economy. And what's happening in the process is jobs are being lost, and loans and homes continue to be foreclosed upon. And that's not just in the United States, that is proliferating throughout Europe as well. There's a deterioration of all sorts of individual versus bank credit agreements, because the jobs aren't coming because there isn't a stable surrounding economy for people to use to up their living standard and to have any sort of comfort or confidence or stability. That's just not happening. And leaders, yeah, they might spout this. You might have a commission here and there. It might get in the papers for a day or two. But in terms of fundamentally addressing these problems rather than speaking about them, they are not doing that. And instead, they are just making it worse by throwing the fuel of bailout money to these fires and not changing structurally, globally, these banks and listening to this notion, accepting and enabling the notion that banks have to stay as they are because otherwise jobs will get lost. Well, we have lost millions of jobs throughout the world. We have lost standard of living throughout the world. We have 25% or more unemployment among the youth of the world. You know, having banks remain as they are and being bailed out has done zero to fix any part of the economy, and instead continues to suck the blood right out of it with the enabling institutions.
Okay, Naomi Prinz, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being again on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Naomi Prinz. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.